Hello everyone, and welcome to Andrew Broussard Watercolors. Today we're going to do a watercolor painting on Stonehenge Aqua. It is 140-pound cold press, and it is 100% cotton. I'm completely saturating it, or just applying a lot of water with the large Ranson hake brush. And then I'm going to talk about the experiment for today. Okay. So the experiment that I want to look at is something that I have quite a bit of difficulty with. It's a tonalist technique. It's something that people will look at and kind of define the category of tonalism using the look that takes place. And I have some qualms with that. I think, tonalism kind of expands different things, but the thing that people usually generalize tonalism as is a sunset or a sunrise picture. Like very at that last moment where the light is shining in a spot, and then you have a whole bunch of items that are backlit. And my issue that I have with trying to paint that is that if I try to put color back into a sunrise, like a red sunrise or a yellow sunrise, I feel like I personally accidentally push that too far forward and it doesn't sit back in the picture plane. I also find that if we were to paint it, and this is my personal opinion, were to paint it and do kind of silhouettes of everything, if we were to use black, it becomes kind of dull and drab. So it's something that is a challenge for me that I wanted to play around with today. I think I'm going to use the approach that I've adopted from the oil painters Stuart Davies and Dennis Sheehan, where we're just going to put color in and we're going to use the paper towel to lift it up and move it around. And let's see, is there anything else that we want to put out before we get started? This piece of paper, I wasn't sure what it was. It's I don't know if I said 11 by 14 because it's 8 by 10, and I had checked it with a mat over it. I wasn't sure what paper it was because I found this sheet in the drawer, and I had SA in the bottom corner, Stonehenge Aqua. So thank you, past Andrew Broussard, for marking that. Made things a lot easier for Mr. Broussard today. Okay, let's do burnt umber and ultramarine. Big gloppy mess. I changed the height of the camera since we're working on a smaller scale, so I'm not sure how much of my palette that you can see. But I'm really gonna put this in. And I'm gonna use my paper towel to lift. Part of me had some other ideas where we can use white. And it's perfectly fine to use white in watercolor. Just know that it'll have different effects than just the white of the paper. We could use masking fluid, which I sound very lazy saying I don't have time for it, but I kind of don't, and I'm not the best at pulling up the masking fluid. So in this case, we're going to just have to use lifting. I did have some other ideas that would be kind of quick and to the point, but I think we'll save that for another video. I'm going to lift these spots completely as much as I can. And pull the moisture out of those regions so we don't get anything to fill back into it. This will be reflected area on water, but we might come back, get some effects. So that'll be our bright sunset horizon. Now it's working on darkening everything else up so that it kind of just sits and makes sense. There's some Payne's gray being put onto this mix. And then on top of that, I think one of the difficulties that take place is working with watercolor, working with the wet and wet, is that we have that tonal shift that takes place when it dries. And if you've watched this channel, you've seen it happen quite a bit. In fact, when I pause to do the dry off, I always say watch and see what's going to happen as this happens. This will be our far distance. I was talking to a fellow painter, and she ordered Carlson's Guide to Landscape Painting. It's a book that I believe was written in 1920s or published 1920s, and probably about a year or so ago, I think we discussed it on this channel. And Carlson's Guide to Landscape Painting has Carlson's theory of angles, and that's something that had popped up a lot in different tonalist painting groups, where the idea is where the light source is coming from, how it affects the sky, how it affects horizontal objects, and how it affects vertical objects is all different because of the angle that it's hitting them at. It's a very cool theory and a very easy to follow one. You could simply summarize it as sky will be lighter, the ground will be mid-tone, vertical objects will be dark. I believe Carlson's Guide also has a really great image, and it has some lines drawn in different shapes, and they converge at different sizes, and it shows, even though they are all the same intensity, the line, the perceived changes that take place due to the thickness of the line and the area around it. Very cool stuff. Since she had mentioned that, I think it was yesterday when I was talking to her, it's going to start getting me thinking about all that stuff again. Personally, I've been doing a lot of different art. I'm just adding Payne's gray right here, just building up my darks. Let me see what Hamby's scratching at. There's a huge pile of paintings that I have, that everybody has, where they want to either revisit them or paint on the back of them. Hammy is currently exploring that pile. That's what that was. So here's a little bit of ultramarine in there. I'm just working on increasing my tonality. There is something that I'm going to discuss in a moment, but I will say this. You are, of course, welcome to follow along with any of these videos. You're more than welcome to sign your name to anything that you do when you follow with one of these videos. And you have my express permission to sell anything that you've done following any one of my tutorials or demos. I want you guys to be successful. Art supplies are expensive, and you know, it builds confidence, and it helps people that are just starting out or have been painting for a little while kind of move on to the next level, or see if they like being at that level of creating art that'll be hanging in other people's homes. And it's always nice having art hanging up. back to this. Oh, so, you know, also, that being said, if you'd like to support this channel, please like, subscribe, follow. And I have a Patreon, which you can financially support through, and there's other means through Etsy and things like that. Okay. So I'm taking the rigger, I'm taking this dark mixture, putting it sideways, creating these textures. Now, one thing that I was thinking about, since I was talking about Carlson's guide, I had started thinking about that image that I was telling you about, where as our shapes get closer to the edge of a dark source to a light source, we could have it very contrasty, going from dark to light, or some of that light will influence that edge right there. And I'm thinking we can kind of apply that concept a little bit by just pulling up a little bit along those edges and create that soft haze. So that softens that sharp edge. And it might make it more interesting the way our eyes would read it. And it makes me think of something else that I've been playing with. I've been doing black and white film photography. I started putting some stuff on the channel in regards to that. Let me know what you think. I know it's different than the painting and the oil painting and the sketching, but I feel like there's a lot to learn from the black and white photography, whether it's composition or tonality. But I'm having issues with some of it, and I believe in photography and film, or either in the developer, there's a term, I think it's accuation, where it'll take those contrasty edges and it'll kind of process it in a fashion where they kind of blend together from one to the next. I think that was the definition of it, which is interesting that came to mind when talking about the softening of the edges where light would start to meet it. Which it all ties together. Okay, so here's our background. We have the light here from our sky. We have this. I'm going to do a dry off and then a second layer, most likely a foreground portion, or kind of more halfway between foreground and midground, and we'll see what happens. So you want to pay attention to how things dry between me pausing it and turning it back on. Okay, we're dry enough, and hopefully you can see that a tonal shift took place where there was a softening, and that's something that when you watercolor you're going to battle. It's something that you want to be aware of when you use your pigments, and be aware what combinations are very guilty of it and what combinations don't have that much of a drying shift. So I'm taking that dark mix and creating these marks, branches and tree trunks on top of the existing one to give us a sense of contrast. And we'll use the hake brush for texture. And a sense of depth. So we have the closer foliage, and then we have the depth from the softer foliage behind it. create horizontal dry brush strokes. Create the same thing here, these textures. A lot of people ask about the brush. This is the Ranson hake brush. I've been using it for 3 years now. So it does apply the stippling effect differently than a brand new one. We explored that in a previous video. I'm going to go back to the number 4, mixing even darker concentration. See if I can grab some phthalo blue. Find the phthalo blue mix. Helps pop forward in the picture plane, especially when working with ultramarine blue and other spots. We can create a series of trees here, and this is going to give an interesting contrast versus what we already put in and that background behind it. This would be a great opportunity for counter change, where we could have it lighter over dark spots and then darken up over light spots. I'm not sure if I'll do that. I always think of Matthew Clemens whenever it comes to counter change. He admins the Ron Ranson Facebook page, which I'm a moderator on. And if you're into fast and loose watercolor painting, that's a great resource, great starting point for big brush, fast and loose watercolor painting. I'm looking at the light source here, and I'm just creating radial lines for the shadow. So shadow would be out here, shadow would be out here, there. So you kind of see there's a little bit of a perspective lines that take place. Doesn't be perfect, doesn't have to be perfect, but it gives us some ideas. Now, somebody that I'm always in awe of, who shares on that Ron Ranson Facebook page, is Ian Campbell. He does just amazing shadow work. I don't know how he does it. I would love for him to do video. Drag another one up. And radial line, the shadow would come out here. We're just helping it sit in place. And we'll grab as pure pigment as we can so that it really sits forward. The issue with this is that with the pure pigment, I'm doing it to fight the tonal shift to help it sit forward in the picture plane, but at the same time you get an effect called bronzing where it dries with a different texture, different reflective texture to it. One resource, handprint.com, would say like a leather effect. So there's an optimal dilution for watercolors and different pigments in order to get that to not happen. But as much as I love art and paint and do as much as I can every day, I don't think I can bring myself to that point of getting that deep into it for the sake of my sanity. I just spent yesterday figuring out the Dyke printing process. I've been working on it for a while, and I'm having issues with my prints, my negatives that I'm making, where they're not dense, contrasty enough to give me highlights and darks in my prints, my Dyke prints. So I've just searching forums, posting all over the place, just trying to figure out ideas, talking to different people. And by the end of the day, I was just completely burnt out. One gentleman who was very, very helpful, and you know, I teach math and physics. He was talking about the different logarithmic scales of different mediums, and the different ranges that it could hit. But it gets very mentally exhausting. So that's one thing you want to ask yourself. And how far deep into watercolors, into whatever art medium you're doing, how far do you want to delve? It's fine to be a hobbyist, and it's fine to be completely engulfed in it. I am not going to fault you if you wanted to use white back here as opposed to lifting. If you wanted to use black paint instead of lifting. If you wanted to use masking fluid, taking a step further. So determine your own level of involvement in art and how deep you go into it, because sometimes it can turn you off if you go too far at times. That's not to discourage you if you want to do that or not. It's just my personal opinion. That happened to me in 2011. Taking art classes at UL. I had moved down here. I was taking classes to get my alternative certification. And I hope you all don't mind these rambly stories. I feel bad if they get sidetracked, but I do feel like they're pertinent at times. Anyway, there was a lot of conceptual art taking place at UL, or at least in the classes that I was in. And I was more on the lines of expressionism, impressionism, landscape painting, and still life painting. And the exposure to concept art and the splattering, etc., kind of had a negative effect on my art and deterred me for a while. I lost my muse, you could say. But now it's been back in full swing for 4 years now. I think we built up a really interesting scene based on that wet and wet and lifting out that soft sky area. Let's see, I'm going to do a pause and a dry off. We'll see if we could do anything else to it. I had a little laugh while I was doing the dry off. I had said, let's see if there's anything else we can do to it. And that reminded me of Joe Menza, who always says, if you're looking for stuff to do on it, call it done at that point. I don't know if that's him quoting somebody else or his advice, but it is fantastic advice. especially with the fast and loose painting. Let's see how it looks underneath the mat. And there you go. I hope you enjoyed. Let me know what you think. What topics and materials you'd like to see me use. And if you follow along, you could also hit me up on social media. I would love to see the results that you do. Some people have been tagging me on Instagram with stuff that they've painted, and it's just really cool to see that work. That's kind of the biggest compliment I get, is for people to watch and follow along. That really means a lot to me. So I appreciate y'all doing that, and I will talk to y'all soon. Have a great day.